Hey, Bills Mafia. We know there's only one topic every day. All Bills, all the time. And now Matt Beauvais and Sal Capaccio are going really deep, talking Bills all year long, because it's always game day in Buffalo.
Well, I guess that was something today. Very, very interesting press conference at One Bills Drive. I was down there earlier. Matt Beauvais, he's still down there right now, wrapping up some stuff so he can go on TV a little bit later. Terry Pegula, Brandon Beane, they both sit at a podium, answer questions for just about an hour about the firing of Sean McDermott, why it happened, how it happened, and going forward. Welcome to It's Always Game Day in Buffalo. And there's so many things that we can kind of touch on that happened in this press conference. What is your one big story that you're taking away? And maybe this is good practice for tonight on the 6, right? 6 o'clock news. Like, what is what is the big thing that you're going to be focusing on from this press conference?
Tim is making fun of me in the distance right now. Tim Graham from The Athletic. I think my big takeaway is, first off, that Terry Pegula even spoke. I thought that we would get a statement from him and then he would kind of shuffle off to the side. So this is the first time that he has spoken to reporters in a Bills capacity since 2019 at the NFL owners meetings. So this was not something that I was expecting, but I also think this is a situation where he does need to talk. So at least hearing from him, I think, was definitely relevant. And I think the fact that he kind of like leaned into the fact that this was his decision. Now, of course, he was going to say that, but he really tried to hammer that home. And it was that, and it was when the decision was made. But then it felt like he completely contradicted himself, because he was like, oh, I made the decision after I watched them lose in Denver. You guys should have been in the locker room. You should have been in the locker room, which coincidentally, we were all in the locker room. So we saw exactly what he was talking about. But then that person I just mentioned, Tim Graham, asked, like, so is this an emotional decision based off of just that game? And then he was like, well, I feel like we hit the wall and I feel like we needed to change. And he basically said, without saying it, he didn't think Sean McDermott was the guy who would be able to get it done. So that's my big takeaway of just like, okay, kind of Terry really digging his heels in and taking ownership of this decision.
Yeah, I like that. One of my big takeaways was that it was really kind of the messaging was clear that they wanted us to come away with, which was, yes, Brandon Beane might be the GM, and on paper, maybe he's in charge of the 90 and the 53 and all that. But I think it was clear that everybody up there, both those guys up there, wanted all of us to know he doesn't make unilateral decisions on the roster. And if you want to just blame him for the roster, it's actually a collaborative effort. In other words, there's the coaching piece of Sean McDermott, of course, that goes into it, but it's not like Brandon Beane just handed him a roster and go coach the guys. You know what I mean? And I think it was very, very pointed to make sure we all knew that.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, I think if you were somebody who was listening to this press conference and you were hoping he would admit, like, the wide receiver room is a disaster or the pass rush isn't good enough, like, that didn't come out of this. That really wasn't broached at all. It didn't feel like they think the roster is as bad as a lot of people think. And, you know, that was a question that he was asked by several people about, like, well, what is up with this roster? Is this roster good enough? Do you believe this roster can win a championship? And he said all of the politically correct answers. I'm always going to believe in these guys. I'm always going to believe in the roster. I understand he has to say that to a certain extent. But, I mean, that's why before we found out Sean McDermott was fired, the conversation we were having was that we thought Brandon Beane's seat would be warmer than Sean McDermott's because the roster just is not very good. Terry Pegula does not seem to feel that way. Terry Pegula seems to think that this sustained success has more to do with the talent on the roster and, of course, Josh Allen than it does with the coaching.
I also would say, though, that we need more time with Brandon Beane to talk about the roster. I think today wasn't the day for that necessarily, right? Today was more of the day.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, because we're used to getting Beane for an hour himself, today we had Beane and Terry Pegula for an hour. So I think down the road soon, we have to have much more of a larger discussion with Brandon Beane about the roster. Let me ask you this, Matt.
We even had the conversation in the room before the press conference started. Like, guys, this needs to be about Sean McDermott. This needs to be about the direction of the organization. Today is not the day to be asking about, hey,
Right.
you thinking about AJ Epinesa, bringing him back next year? Like, that would have been completely lost in all of this. So, yeah, there are an astronomical amount of roster questions that we are going to need to figure out, but certainly that's not happening anytime soon.
Okay. I've thought it. I think it's really interesting going back and being a part of this in the room and then watching the reaction online from fans, from media. It seems to me national media really believes this was a disaster of a press conference. Whereas if you're in the room like you and me and some of our colleagues, I don't want to speak for you. I didn't think it was quite that. There were times where I think maybe they stepped in it, no doubt about it. But we heard from the owner and we haven't heard from him in a while. He took responsibility and said, it's my decision. There were a few times where, okay, it looked like maybe he shouldn't have intervened when he did. That's fine. But I didn't think it was quite the large disaster that the national media played it out to be from afar. What did you think?
I think if the Keon Coleman stuff doesn't happen, there's very few people on the outside who are like, oh, this was a complete disaster clown show. I mean, that was bad. The fact that the Keon Coleman thing happened is crazy. And I think that's what a lot of people are commenting on and being like, what in the world is going on in Buffalo? But the fact that we did hear from Terry Pegula is notable. And the fact that, I just think that thing is going to kind of overshadow a lot of that. But I, at the same time, think that's kind of a bigger story outside of Buffalo than it is. You know what I mean? Like that's the
I do too.
Headline grabbing thing that people are going to share the clip on social media. People are going to be talking about. But I think like if you're watching this podcast, if you're a fan of this team, if you're trying to pay attention to what happens next, the Keon Coleman thing is very much a sidebar. I do not think that's the biggest takeaway. That is, though, the biggest gaffe of what happened today, because I cannot believe that they talked that way about a player who is still on the roster, which is insane.
And just so everybody knows, basically, Brandon Beane was asked about wide receiver, and then he was asked about, I think, just like picking players, basically. And Terry Pegula interrupted and said, "Can I interrupt?" He said that Keon Coleman was pushed by the coaches, and then later, our colleague John Warrow, the Associated Press, reported that Terry basically informed him or them at the AP he wasn't specifically meaning Sean McDermott, by the way. He meant just the coaching staff, which you could say Adam Henry, Joe Brady, whoever that could be the case from. Yeah, I find it interesting. Like Mike Greenberg of ESPN, for example, I don't know if you saw his tweet. Like I'm looking at his tweet and he said, the Bills managed to do something I thought impossible, make a job with Josh Allen as the quarterback less attractive. Like I don't agree with that at all.
No, I don't think so either. I don't think that this press conference had any impact on the type or caliber of candidate that they are going to be able to attract. I mean, I still think that it is one of the best jobs available. If you wanted to make the argument it's the best job available, then I could totally understand that. But yeah, I don't think what happened today is going to be scaring away a candidate of being like, oh my gosh, I do not want to step into that dysfunction. Keep in mind, we've seen some real humdingers of press conferences here in Buffalo over the years. This doesn't even, to me, like crack the top 3 most ridiculous press conferences I've sat in on. So that's why I'm like, maybe I'm just numb to it at this point. But I just keep thinking back to I'm not privy to that conversation press conference after they moved on. So it's like, there were times when it was ridiculous, but I didn't think it was overall like that much of a disaster. That's just me personally. There's going to be people who listen to this and completely disagree, and that's totally fine.
You get a different perception when you're on the outside watching it, when you're in the room and you're part of it and it was organized and you're asking a question, you're trying to get the answer and you get the answer. I think it was good. And I think, I think for the most part, the questions that needed to be asked were asked, and, Brandon Beane, whatever you want to say about his answers, that's fine. And I'm sure kept a lot close to the vest and didn't say a lot of things he could have. Same thing with Terry Pegula, but Terry was honest and to a point where he said he made this decision after going in the locker room, firing Sean McDermott, after the Denver Broncos playoff game, seeing how emotional that locker room was, walking up to Josh Allen to say it was a catch, and Josh didn't even acknowledge him because he was sobbing so much. And he said basically in those moments is when he decided to fire Sean McDermott. So you could read into that, well, then he made a snap, rush, judgment decision based on one game. And then he said, no, that's not the case. We hit the proverbial playoff wall. And he thought to himself, on top of that, year after year, this keeps happening. I need to make a change.
Yeah, here's the quote. I have it transcribed right here. I feel like we hit the proverbial playoff wall year after year. I just sensed in that locker room, like, where do we go from here with what we have? And that was the basis for my decision. So that was kind of the main quote. And then, he went on to later say, it's not an easy decision. Trust me with that success. But what is success? Is success being in the playoffs 7 years in a row with no Super Bowl appearances? And that was him kind of like posing that question. And I do think that's another kind of key point of this press conference today, is that little answer that was mixed in there, because it does feel like that's ultimately what led to this. What is success? Is success what they have been doing, or is success winning the Super Bowl? And Terry made it clear with several of his answers today, he feels like this was not the guy that was going to be able to lead them to ultimate success, getting to a Super Bowl, winning a Super Bowl, which is why he made the decision he did. And I think we all knew that when the decision was made. Like, okay, they're probably just sick of going to the playoffs every year, winning a game, getting bounced, maybe winning 2 and getting bounced. I'm sure watching the Patriots leapfrog them in the division and now basically, be 60 minutes away from going to a Super Bowl against a backup quarterback, that certainly didn't help things either. But yeah, I do think that's like an interesting kind of layer to all of this as well, is like, okay, that's what we thought, but then we got the clarification of that today.
The perception of a power struggle was really played down by both guys here today.
Yeah, that was the
Brandon Beane was. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was the other big takeaway for me.
I agree.
Was how passionate and like adamant he was, Brandon Beane, about that specific dynamic and those specific questions that he was asked.
Brandon Beane said, quote, "That's hurtful to even hear or say that. I worked 19 seasons starting as an intern in Carolina and worked my way up. I came here and I've never tried to do that. I would love for anyone who's making that accusation to walk in these doors and ask any person, player, coach, trainer, anyone. People can disagree with draft picks that I make or people I sign or I screwed up wide receivers, whatever it is. Those are harmful things. I walk in the door and my wife's got tears coming down her face for stuff like that. I'm going to damn try hard to win a Super Bowl here. I am. But for somebody to question my character like that is BS. I've never done that." Very passionate response. Terry Pegula said if he ever felt someone was having a power play, as he put it, trying to have more power, wield more power than another, that person would be out of here. So both guys say that was not the case. No power struggle between Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. Clearly there were disagreements. I would say clearly there was some sort of friction that maybe had never existed before that we felt as well. But they both say, but it wasn't like me or the other guy. We're vying for the power here.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I feel like that's certainly what he was trying to hammer home. And, it's also Terry Pegula's answers, I think, kind of validate that, if that's how you heard it, if that's how you interpreted it. I do think that was kind of a big talking point going into this press conference, going into today, was what happened behind the scenes that led to this kind of breakup ultimately happening. There were a couple other questions. I think Tim had one. I have the transcript right here about like, when did this kind of like sever, or when did this start to like drift away? And, they danced around that a little bit of like, well, that's not exactly what happened. We'll always collaborate with each other. And they even leaned into that moving forward too, of like, that's how a successful organization needs to be. You need to have that type of collaboration. So I do think that there is something there, but I think Beane really wanted to try and make it clear and was using this press conference to kind of show like, that's not what ultimately happened. This was a Terry Pegula decision. Did he have influence in the Terry Pegula decision? I would imagine. How much of that? I have no idea, and that would completely be me speculating, and I don't feel super comfortable doing that.
We had a lot of questions on whether or not Josh Allen was on board with this decision. Terry never gave a full answer on that. He said that he's not going to do that, right? But he did say that Josh will be a part of the team that's going to help choose the next coach, which I interpret meaning he'll be asked, what are your thoughts on this person? It's not like he's picking the coach. I want to make sure that that's clear from my perspective, what I think. But we didn't get clarity on whether or not Josh Allen endorsed or fought back against any firing of Sean McDermott, or whether or not he was even told it happened. It was going to happen, right?
Well, it didn't seem like it. It didn't seem like it. It kind of made it seem like Terry Pegula just made the decision and then told who he needed to tell, and that Josh Allen was not one of those people who knew before it happened. And then they spoke afterwards, and the fact that he wouldn't share what Josh said or what Josh was feeling, I guess that's not a major surprise, but I also think that it is telling, and you can kind of read the tea leaves a little bit and wonder, like, how emotional was Josh? What did he think about the decision? Of course he's going to be a part of the next one that they make. That would be foolish to not at least get his opinion of like, hey, this is the direction we think we're going. But I was surprised, like, Catherine, you asked that question about Josh Allen. Yeah, like, I was surprised. I would have thought that if they made the decision to fire Sean McDermott, one of the first conversations they had would be with Josh Allen. And just be like, this is a conversation that we're having. This is something we are thinking about. We don't want you to find out from an Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport tweet on Monday morning. But it feels like that's the way they found out, which is really surprising to me.
we were down there on Sunday. Remember, we did not hear from Josh on Sunday. I think a lot of people were wondering, is something going on? I never thought that maybe he knew or was involved in any talks or whatever. I mean, they're doing exit physicals. The timing just doesn't have to be right about that. So I don't think he had to have known anything until it was actually done. But now that Josh Allen is going to be in some capacity involved in this process, does that get you even more towards a Brian Daboll, more towards an offensive type of coach, or more towards anybody specific or type of coach specifically?
I think that they're hiring an offensive coach regardless.
Me too.
I don't
Me
think
too.
that just has to do with Josh Allen. It just feels like after what the thing that's interesting though is it feels like the options of defensive minded, and I use air quotes here, defensive minded head coaches, the list and the resumes there are stronger than the offensive people who are available.
Right.
But I just would be like, you see the initial reports out there and there's a Lou Anarumo and there's an Anthony Weaver. Like I would be shocked if that was the decision that they made, if that was the direction they would go, unless they have a slam dunk offensive coordinator option or they think Brian would be an offensive coordinator. I just don't necessarily get that sense. So yeah, I think it'll be an offensive minded person, but nothing that happened today changed my mind on that.
Okay. So let's talk about the next head coach, and we can revisit the other things too if you want to get to, but let's start moving the story forward a little bit here. We know we have 6 names that have been reported so far from various reports, various people, that the Bills have requested.
4 cameras on me right now.
Interviews.
Perino's got his phone out. Jay, noted fan of the pods, got his phone out. Dom's over there, and Joe Biscaglia just said hi.
Hi, everybody. Hi,
this
everybody.
is a very strange dynamic.
Hi, everybody. I'm in Studio Capaccio. Matt's still down at One Bills Drive. There's a difference between radio and TV. I can do video like this, but I just have to go on radio, so I can do it from anywhere. You got to go on TV from down in location there. All right, so we have 6 names. Lou Anarumo, you mentioned. Anthony Weaver, you mentioned. Also, Brian Daboll, Joe Brady, Anthony Lynn, Grant Udinski. Udinski is the offensive coordinator for the Jaguars. Anthony Lynn, as people know, was in Buffalo. He was running backs coach, assistant head coach, became the interim head coach. When Rex Ryan was fired, he's in Washington now as the running backs coach. Anthony Weaver was in Buffalo in 2013 as their D-line coach, very highly respected, was in Baltimore for a couple of years as their defensive, one of their defensive coaches. I don't know the exact title offhand. And now he's in Miami as their defensive coordinator. Then you have Joe Brady, of course, from here in Buffalo, offensive coordinator. Lou Anarumo, who was in Cincinnati for quite a while as their DC. Now he's in Indy as their DC. And then, of course, there's Brian Daboll, who we know Josh has a really great relationship with, was his offensive coordinator here for 4 years and recently fired by the New York Giants as head coach. We expect more names to come from this list.
Definitely. How
does this initial list grab you, though?
Doesn't surprise me, but on the initial list of these reported interviews that they're doing, the only one that I think is almost like and I don't want to pigeonhole myself here, I think Brian Daboll is a very viable and realistic thing that could happen.
Yes.
I think Joe Brady is also probably a realistic thing that could happen, but it's not something that I think should happen. I don't think that would be a smart move for this team because I feel like at times this year the offense wasn't very good with him as the offensive coordinator, and we should be talking about whether or not he's keeping that job, let alone getting a promotion.
Agreed.
But I think the Brian Daboll element is probably the most notable on this initial list. I think Udinski's really interesting because it's like a young, fresh, innovative name that I think would grab a ton of headlines. I just admittedly don't know enough about him. I know that he's the offensive coordinator in Jacksonville and that Trevor Lawrence took a big step, but at the same time, how much of that is Liam Cohen? How much of that is him? But I do think we'll need to wait several weeks because I think the other names that they will certainly look into are Clint Kubiak. I think Davis Webb is another one. Maybe, there's probably other ones out there that they're just going to have to wait and see once this process happens with the AFC and NFC championship.
Yeah, and by the way, Grant Udinski, not only with Liam Cohen, he was with Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota before that. So he's got a bit of a pedigree, you know, with some real, I guess, well thought of offensive coaches.
You just brought up Kevin O'Connell. I was thinking about this yesterday. I was like, if you could take any coach in the NFL and make them the head coach of the Buffalo Bills, who would it be? And I think the easy answers people would get to would probably be like Sean McVay. I'm sure you would have some people who would suggest Andy Reid, maybe a couple other names immediately pop up. Is Kevin O'Connell not the answer? Like, would he not be the absolute? I know that's not realistic, but I'm saying that would be somebody on his coaching.
I don't know if he'd be the
tree
answer, but he'd be mentioned. I'd put him in that mix. I'd have to think long and hard about it because I'd put him and Kyle Shanahan kind of right there with each other, maybe.
Yeah, well, Kyle Shanahan is another option at least.
Well, to me, this is interesting. This is interesting. You say Sure. Is it possible we've seen coaches get traded for before? Yes. Here's why I don't think that's an option at all in Buffalo. This is just my interpretation of this. Brandon Beane knows he has to also do work around the roster. He needs assets to do that. You know what you got to give up to give the coach? Assets. And then you're taking those assets you need to pick players and putting them on a coach. It doesn't make sense to me. I just don't think they would do it.
No, I mean, it would depend what it would cost, right? Like if there's truly friction there, I think we're assuming it would be a big price tag. Maybe it wouldn't be a big price tag. Maybe it would just be this course has kind of run itself out and both places are looking for a change of scenery. I don't think that to be the case. I think that they will hire somebody on the initial list or somebody who they bring in after the fact. But yeah, it's just an interesting thought.
The Bills obviously they're under a time crunch here. Here's the problem with winning in a way, Matt. If you win enough and you fire your coach after winning and getting 2 rounds deep into the playoffs, a lot of the coaches you might have wanted a few weeks ago are already taking jobs. And on top of that, they're scooping up the people who are coordinators and getting coordinator jobs and interviews. And I'll give you a great example here, just because we got a report from Diana Rossini that said Brian Daboll really wants the Bills head coaching job. So he's not going to make a decision on the Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator's job. Well, that's fine. But the Philadelphia Eagles could go to Brian Daboll and go, we need your decision now. We're not going to wait on the Bills. Why would we do that? Right? Yeah. They don't have to. So the Bills are in a tough spot here because if they do want to wait on any of these coaches that are still coaching until after the Super Bowl, and by the way, just to clarify the rule, as far as I understand it, they can interview any coach if they lose, obviously, this weekend. If they win, they cannot interview them until after the Super Bowl. They can request an interview with them. They can't interview them till after the Super Bowl. But Matt, if they have to wait till after the Super Bowl and then they get a guy, like a lot of the other people they would want to bring with them are probably already spoken for, to be quite honest. This is tough.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one, but at the same time, I don't think the Bills are going to rush. Like, I would be really surprised if we found anything out by this time next week. It just feels like that's probably too soon, unless it's Brian Daboll or unless it's Joe Brady, and you can start to do your due diligence now as opposed to having to wait. But it doesn't feel like that's necessarily the case. Like, I know if you look at betting odds and you look at some of the other different like markets that are out there, the front runners here are Daboll and Joe Brady, but then like Clint Kubiak and Davis Webb. So like if those guys can't be available at the earliest until Monday, it does not feel like something the Bills would be rushing into here.
Matt Bove, Sal Capaccio. It is always game day in Buffalo. Make sure you're watching on the video side at Sal Sports. Make sure you're subscribed, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you pod. It doesn't matter. Okay. Anything else that, okay, let's just talk about the Keon Coleman stuff. All right. We have to kind of get into this because after everything that's said, one of the things coming out of this is, well, then how, if you're Keon Coleman, can we even walk onto that team and walk into the locker room and think that you're wanted around the building, right? Because it feels like that would be the case. Although Brandon Beane's like, I still believe in Keon Coleman and he's still a young guy. I mean, is there a massaging of the relationship that has to go on here?
He was trying to say, I think he was trying to,
pump up the value.
Yeah, I think like, okay, Keon Coleman's not playing for this team again. So I think Brandon Beane's got, I think.
A great question. What is the percentage? I asked this. I was sitting next to Carl Jones and Josh Reed in the media room, and I said, "What percentage do you give Keon Coleman to be on the opening day roster? What do you give it?"
25%.
Oh, I think I heard a couple of people next to me were like way less, like 5 and 10%. I'm more like you. I still think it's probably higher than that because you still got to find somebody who'd win the trade and not just give them away. And who knows between now and
your owner plummeted any value there right here. The fact that happened 3 feet away from where I'm sitting right now, the owner being like, hey, by the way, the Keon Coleman decision was not Brandon's. It was the coaching staff's decision. And he was being a good teammate here. Like Brandon then did say later, Keon Coleman was my pick. We still believe in Keon. He's a young player. He has to say that because in 2 months, he's going to be on the phone with other teams. And he's going to be like, can I interest you in a gently used Keon Coleman? And they're going to be like, we heard what your owner said about him. And it does not seem like it's somebody who you have future plans for. We will give you future considerations or something just to get him out the door. So I think that was Brandon Beane trying to be like, hey, Keon Coleman could still be great. We believe in him. The owner doesn't, but we do.
I don't disagree. And that's why you get to at least the 25%, because there's still got to be a world where he's on your team, because you're not just going to give him away. Now, that said, if you were going to make a deal, I think it would have to be right around draft time or something dealing with this year's draft. Or if it doesn't happen, then he's probably coming to camp, and then maybe something happens after camp. I just don't know. There's got to be a couple pivot points in all of this right now.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's one. But here's the other thing too. I think what Brandon said today does not inspire a ton of confidence that there will be massive wide receiver changes, even though I certainly think there has to be. I mean, there are several questions here. I have the list of questions in front of me just because I was keeping track. And there's like 5 questions about the wide receiver position.
I got it.
Hey, when I have Josh Allen, my number one priority is protecting Josh Allen. That was something that he brought up. But then you have questions about what happens to David Edwards, what happens to Connor McGovern. Do you go out and you add new wide receivers? It certainly feels like they will. There will be 3 or 4 new wide receivers that are probably on this team next year. But what are they? Are they established players? Are they high draft picks? Are they more of what they've done, of like a Josh Palmer and a Curtis Samuel, and hoping that works out, even though these last 2 instances they haven't? So I think Keon is just kind of a piece of all of this. And how much of an overhaul do we see? But like, here's a good one. What's more likely next year? Brandon Cooks is on this team or Keon Coleman's on this team?
Brandon Cooks.
I think I'd say Brandon Cooks, right?
I think so too. Yeah.
Right? I don't think that's crazy. I think that he's like your 5th wide receiver. You know what he can do. He's kind of the type of receiver that Josh seems to trust. I just don't.
But Matt, I'm going to say this. I mean, it's so weird to be in this position. We have not been in this position in a long time. By the way, what were you doing the last time the Bills had a coach search? What position were you in? 2017.
In 2017, I was the photographer at Channel 7 shooting Joe Biscaglia and Jeff Russo covering the Sean McDermott introductory press conference.
It's amazing.
So it's been a long time since one of these things has happened here.
Okay, and you're right about that. So I'm going to say that this is unique for me, because anytime we talk about roster decisions, I would say, well, I think Sean really likes that guy, so I have a hard time maybe seeing them move on. Or Sean, you know what I mean? Like his input, what he thinks. So now everything's open. I'm thinking about guys like Dawson Knox, guys like Deion Dawkins even. I'm not suggesting the Bills are moving on from these guys. These are people that have been with Sean a long time, who make a lot of money, that the Bills are going to have to make a lot of tough roster decisions over the next year. And everything is open now. Everything is open. You can't now say, you know what? Yeah, that's a Sean guy. He's been here with him, locker room guy. And it's totally different now in the way we have to think about everything.
Yeah, and think about even just like the domino effect. And this is, a little bit into the weeds, but think about like we've known for years kind of what the practice schedule would look like,
yes,
what the press conference schedule would look like, what the training camp schedule would look like. Like Sean McDermott liked early practices, 9:15 press conference, 9:45. So all of this stuff is ultimately going to change if they go out and they find somebody new, unless it's somebody who has been here. And I mean, like if they hire Joe Brady, maybe that's the way you keep things status quo, even though I don't think that would be a good idea. If it's Brian Dable, maybe it's some sort of blend of what the Bills have done and what he did in New York. But he's like, yeah, it didn't work perfectly in New York, so I got to try and change some things up or tweak some things. So yeah, there is going to be a domino effect here. And I think that this is the first thing we need to figure out, because it could shape the way, it will shape the way the offseason goes, because it'll be about which type of players are they looking for? Which side of the ball are they trying to address? You don't go out and bring in an offensive-minded head coach and run it back with wide receivers that are Brandon Cooks, Gabe Davis, Tyrell Shavers, Khalil Shakir, Josh Palmer. You don't do that. You have to go and get somebody who can truly play. I don't think it'll be a defensive guy, but I'm sure once again we'll be talking about the defensive line. That was one element of today that didn't happen because, like we said, the focus today was about Sean McDermott and the decision and where they go from here. But that is something that I was thinking about, like in the game against the Broncos, Bo Nix threw 46 passes. He was never sacked. He was pressured on 20% of his dropbacks. That is the fewest pressures they have had in any of their playoff games in the Sean McDermott era. How did they put so many resources into the defensive line, and it somehow got worse than it was previously? It's fascinating.
Something interesting, too, that happened during this was Sean was asked about, and he spoke about the Darius Slayton situation. I'm glad he was asked about it because it kind of was a little forgotten about with all this, right? And it was something that happened that we never, I'm sorry, Brandon, not Sean. And Brandon never really had to speak on it. But what I found interesting was, I'm going to read you the quote. He basically said that they were thinking about if something were to happen to Tre'Davious White, if something were to happen to Christian Benford, where they are, how thin they are. He said, if that were to happen, the next guy is Jamarcus Ingram. We think Darius, with his history and his pedigree, would be a good guy. Quote, we are trending towards the playoffs, and so we talked about it, and Sean and his coaches watched him. We talked about the pros and cons of doing it, and we ultimately decided to do it. So that quote is him telling you McDermott was on board with Darius Slay, right? And I know that it doesn't have to mean that McDermott's on board with letting go Jamarcus Ingram, but at the same time, he goes on to say, we wanted to get him back, but anytime we release a player, we know that he could get claimed by another team.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that that's part of it. And I also do think that that's interesting because does the game end differently if Darius Slay is there as opposed to Dane Jackson? Does it end
or Jamarcus Ingram?
Jamarcus Ingram is there. It certainly probably ends differently if Maxwell Harrison is there.
I think so.
So it's crazy how all of these little decisions and all of these little pieces factor into the outcome that we ultimately saw. I mean, they did. The turnovers are why they lost the game. Even though Terry stood up here several times today and alluded to the fact that it was a bad call and that Brandon Cooks caught it and all of this stuff. They were up 4 points with the lead and a couple minutes left in the game. So an offensive score or overtime going differently would have changed the outcome, but so would getting one singular stop. I should say, because the defense was good in the second half.
We also learned on Wednesday, Josh Allen is going to have some sort of procedure or something on his foot. Yeah. I asked at the very end of how's Josh health is, if there's anything going on. He said, basically, yes, that it's potentially that something could happen with his foot and soon, but it would not impact anything with OTAs, but still concerning, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, the fact that it won't impact anything long-term, I think is definitely promising. Here, what I want to do, unless you don't have any other, I want to go through just kind of the questions that were asked, and then we can highlight if any of these things we think needs to be touched on. So Pegula opening statement, Beane opening statement. Why would Sean be fired after a bad call? We touched on that. Did you fire Sean because he said the roster was bad? That goes to a report from, I believe, Vic Carucci, who put that out there, that there was some sort of meeting a couple weeks ago where Sean brought up the fact that the roster wasn't very good. Elena bringing up the playoff game in the locker room and how it ended. Lance, how did you determine the coaching staff as opposed to the talent on the roster? Perino asked the question about a big chunk of the fan base being frustrated with that wide receiver comment to WGR and if he regretted that. Any takeaways from that one?
I thought it was really interesting that he spoke at length about it. That was my first takeaway, right? Mm-hmm. He made sure he said it wasn't personal or anything like that with the hosts. And I get it. And listen, I'm going to say this. After he went on WGR and I went on the radio subsequently, I would always say, look, I think Brandon's just a really passionate guy and he was defending his guys. To him, it was sounding like people are going after his picks at wide receiver and he loves those guys. So to him, he hears it different than what it kind of is said actually on the radio. You know what I mean? And that's what I always felt. And I think today kind of got you a little bit more there.
Yeah, definitely. I asked a question about, is it a completely open search? And of course they're going to say it's an open search, but I do feel like, and it's something we talked about when they fired Sean, if you're going to fire Sean, you probably have to have a short list. That doesn't mean that you're going to not extensively go out and cast a wide net. And I do think that that is like an important piece to all of this. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this and you see these initial candidates roll in, they're going to interview a bunch of people. Yeah. Do not overreact to every single name that you see. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the fact that they like, hey, yeah, we're open to anything. We're considering anything. Like that to me doesn't feel genuine. It feels like that's what they have to say, but not probably how they truly feel. Like I wonder if there's 4 or 5 names that they're seriously considering, but they interview 10 or 11 people.
Yeah, as I've said this week, I mean, you always have to have a short list because you never know if your coach walks in and resigns on you one day. Like you got to be ready to go. So they got to have people in mind. And I agree with you that they're going to hire. To me, I'd be stunned if it was somebody not on the offensive side, but they're going to look at everybody and sure, maybe somebody else blows them away and they're like, hey, let's get this defensive guy because he's got some OC that we really like too, that he'll bring along with him. That's possible. They will interview and they should interview as many people as they can and open it up to offense, defense, special teams. It does not matter. But I think that at the end of the day, I would predict it would be offensive side of the ball.
This was unintentionally hilarious, but when Joe Buscaglia asked the question about Brandon's relationship with Sean and the reference of a power play and Terry following up with like, oh, if you're on a power play, you're out. It was hilarious that Terry Pegula is not somebody who supports a power play, because we've seen that with his other team for a decade now.
Stop it.
And
Stop it.
That was a funny little comment that he was making. There was the question today, like, why is Terry answering questions today? Waro asked that one. I think that's genuine. Like, why today? Why after 9 years was today the day, or not 9 years? Why after 7 years was today the day he finally answered questions? Were you surprised? I was.
Once they said he'd be up there, I thought maybe it could happen, but I even thought like maybe he'll just introduce Brandon and say I fired the coach, and then we move on. But sure, to get the notice that would he be Terry and Brandon at the same time, of course I was surprised. I mean,
yeah, but
who wouldn't be? We haven't heard from him in a long time.
But we also just saw this with the Kevin Adams press conference. When they fired Kevin Adams, Terry walked up to the podium. He said a statement. Then he walked off to the side, and then Yarmo came in. Now that's different because they were literally introducing the replacement. So of course, like a lot of the attention would go towards the replacement. But no, I thought that was very notable because it's something that we are not used to here. And that's why, like, you can on the outside looking in be like, hey, this was a complete disaster. And, you know, you could be a Bills fan and you could say, like, they made a fool of themselves today. And if that's your opinion, that is totally fine. The fact that we heard from him, to me, is more impactful than anything that he ultimately even said, honestly.
It's a great point. And Jay Skursky asked, are we going to hear from you more often? And he said, he kind of gave an indication that he thinks that could happen, but he didn't know. It's like, obviously with Kim's health and things going on in the family, he said, I can't really even watch my daughter play tennis. But he said it's possible that he could wind up, speaking to us a little bit more, not only just on the Bills side, but on the Sabres side, obviously. Hey, listen, I'll say this. If the Sabres make the playoffs this year, I think we're going to hear from Terry Pegula at some point.
Yeah, probably. We should have started this podcast with a little Consta Hellenis conversation. That would have been good. I'm trying to look at the other ones here. Yeah, you brought up the Jay question, the $850 million in taxpayer dollars. Do you plan on being more accessible? Oh, how about this? Will the new head coach be reporting to you? Elena asked that question. It feels like it, but he was trying to kind of make that seem less significant than it is.
By the way, shout out to Elena. She said she asked a question that I asked. I must have been terrible at asking it because I asked this same question earlier and he didn't answer it the right way. So good job on Elena to ask again, because I asked the same question about the structure of the organization. But what he took it was how they're going to hire the coach and the structure of hiring the coach. I meant once the coach is hired. However, once Elena asked that, he said nothing's really going to change. It's going to be the same way. And on top of that, Catherine Fitzgerald asked about if he's going to remain on as GM. I have thought and said and tweeted that I think Brandon Beane will say, okay, I'm the GM through the draft, run the draft, and then push it off and say, now I'm just the head of football ops. He said he's the GM going forward. So he kind of squashed my theory.
Yeah. I feel like that's where he cut his teeth.
Yeah.
I never thought he would veer away from that. It doesn't feel like it's as notable of a change as maybe it appears to be, even though it's still a promotion. It is still a promotion, and the hierarchy is changing. There's a much more clean path here. Goes to kind of how the Sabres have done it, which hasn't really worked out. But it's Terry, it's now Brandon, and then whoever they hire in the next couple weeks here.
No doubt. What else you got there?
We kind of rattled through it. I guess it's more just like, what do we think the next steps are? What do we think this timeline looks like?
Well, I think in the next couple of days, we're going to start hearing about people actually getting interviews because they can do it with certain people. I think we're going to hear about the 6 people we mentioned on the list coming in, meeting for interviews. Maybe it could be a virtual, but most likely in person for most of these people. We'll see where these things go. Why are you laughing now? People making fun of you in there?
Note here, I won't say who it came from. What is Pegula beef with the power play? The joke here is that even though Keon caught the biggest stray of the press conference, Seth Appert caught the second biggest stray because of the power play comment, and he's been the guy who's been trying to figure out Buffalo. At least, hey, Sabres have been pretty good lately. So.
Isaiah, do you know where the Sabres rank currently on the power play?
Let me tell you, Sal, whatever they rank is a flawed number because the power play, even with these last couple games where they have had success in the power play, it is still not nearly as consistent as it needs to be.
Well, it's 21st anyway. It's 21st.
21st. One of two things needs to. This isn't a Sabres podcast. One of two things needs to happen for the Sabres to make the playoffs. Now it is. They have to get more consistent goaltending, or their power play has to become a little bit more dangerous. If one of those things happens, they are going to make the playoffs.
Well, one of the things that can happen to help that is Josh Norris actually stays healthy for quite a while. That might help the power play a little bit.
Sorry,
as well.
This is probably when it got off the rails, and people are like, "Okay, let's stop listening here."
That's okay. We're gonna have a lot more for you. Matt is down at One Bills Drive. You can follow him along at Matt_Bove, and of course WKBW TV. You can follow me at Sal Sports on X, and of course WGR Sports Radio 550. Tell everybody from me, thank you for letting us do this today because you did not have Wi-Fi in another area. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you from me.
Look at all these people who have been making fun of me. Everybody but Waro. Waro hasn't made any comments. He's been.
You can tell him, say, Sal said thanks for letting us intrude. So there you go.
Bye, Sal.
Bye. See you, buddy. Bye, everybody.